Reality Case Studies, Season 3, Episode 1, Part 2 of 2, When Two Nervous Systems Try to Love Each Other, The Valley, Kristen and Luke, Through the Eyes of a Therapist. Welcome back to the Path to Peace Therapy podcast. I'm Stephanie Buckley, Associate Marriage and Family Therapist, ADHD and OCD Specialist, and Family Systems Coach. I specialize in ADHD, OCD, executive functioning challenges, emotional regulation, and the patterns that keep families stuck. And I provide tools and strategies to move through the patterns and help create healthy ones. If you're new here, let me tell you a little about who I am and why this work matters so deeply to me. I'm Stephanie Buckley, a solution-focused therapist whose work is grounded in Bowen family systems theory, one of the most influential frameworks for understanding how anxiety, attachment, patterns of relating, and emotional processes are transmitted throughout families across generations. Rather than asking, who is the problem? Bowen's work encourages us to ask, what is happening within the family emotional system? That shift in perspective fundamentally changes the way we understand conflict, parenting, marriage, and human behavior. Throughout this episode, you'll hear me move fluidly between neuroscience, psychology, endocrinology, attachment theory, and Bowen family systems, because no single discipline can adequately explain the complexity of human relationships. I'm also a wife of more than 3 decades and a mom. Our son is a thriving 23-year-old young adult who is neurodivergent, living with ADHD and OCD. He is a self-taught musician who plays entirely by ear. His first instrument was the piano, which he began teaching himself around the age of 10. He would listen to the same song repeatedly, sit down at the piano, and patiently press one key after another until he discovered the exact sound he was hearing in his mind. I would sit beside him for hours, watching his brain solve problems in a way I had never witnessed before. Long before I had the language of executive functioning, neuroplasticity, sensory processing, or neurodiversity, I was watching them unfold in real time through my own son. Later, he approached the guitar with that same remarkable persistence. I still remember him teaching himself slow dancing in a burning room by John Mayer. One afternoon, I counted him playing that song well over 100 times, not because someone told him to practice, not because he was being disciplined, because his brain was relentlessly pursuing mastery. He was refining tiny movements, listening for microscopic differences in tone, timing, and rhythm, until what he heard internally matched what his hands could finally produce. Watching him learn transformed the way I understood the human brain. It also became one of the reasons I eventually returned to graduate school to become a therapist. Today, as a solution-focused therapist who practices through the lens of Bowen family systems, I spend my days helping individuals, couples, parents, and families understand that behavior is rarely random. Every behavior is occurring within a larger emotional system. And when we understand that system, we move beyond judgment and toward meaningful, lasting change. That is exactly what this Reality Case Studies trademark series is designed to do. Today, he plays the piano, guitar, drums, ukulele, and bass, and he is a singer, songwriter, and performer pursuing music with the Taft Buckley Band. Before music became his primary path, Taft spent nearly a decade competing as an elite sailor at the national and international level. As a family, we traveled the world with his sailing career, including Palermo, Spain, Lake Garda, Italy, South Africa, Sri Lanka, and Belgium. At just 11 years old, he made his first U.S. sailing team in the Optimist class. Watching him move from elite sailing into music has given me a front row seat to neurodivergent development, performance psychology, resilience, motivation, and what can happen when a child's brain is supported rather than misunderstood. His song, Thanks for Stopping By, is on Spotify, with more music to come, and I would love for you to follow him and his bandmates. The Taft Buckley Band played Beach Life Festival in both 2025 and 2026. In 2025, Beach Life featured artists including Lenny Kravitz, Sublime, Alanis Morissette, Train, The Pretenders, Jackson Browne, The Beach Boys, and Marcus King. In 2026, the festival lineup included Duran Duran, The Offspring, James Taylor, The Chainsmokers, and Sheryl Crow. To share a festival stage alongside artists like these, at 23, is a reflection of just how far a supported neurodivergent brain can go. I've also been with my husband for over 3 decades, and he too is neurodivergent, living with ADHD and OCD. ADHD and OCD have strong genetic components, and while my husband's and my son's ADHD and OCD present somewhat differently, they are also remarkably alike in many ways. My husband also plays by ear, which has helped me understand, on a very personal level, how neurodivergent brains can process sound, pattern, repetition, emotion, and creativity in extraordinary ways. I am the neurotypical parent and spouse in our family, and everything I bring to this podcast comes from both my clinical training and my lived experience inside a neurodivergent family system. This series is called Reality Case Studies, Real Stories, Real Psychology, Real Tools for Everyday Life. My goal is not to gossip about celebrities or to critique reality television. I love reality TV, and I have deep respect for the people who have chosen to share their lives with the world. My goal is to use publicly available stories as teaching moments, as a way to introduce real psychological tools you can use in your own life. Reality television offers something remarkably unique. We watch people make decisions under pressure. We see relationships unfold over years instead of hours. We witness patterns repeat themselves. We observe conflict, repair, avoidance, attachment, anxiety, grief, and family dynamics in real time. As a clinician, those patterns are fascinating because they so often mirror the very same struggles I see every day in my therapy office. When we study a story on the screen and then turn it back toward our own lives, reality television stops being entertainment and becomes a mirror. That is the whole purpose of this series. Before we go any further, I want to be clear about something extremely important. Throughout this series, I am not diagnosing anyone. This is a case study, not a diagnosis. I have never met or evaluated anyone featured on The Valley. We study only the observable patterns, and then we turn every one of them back toward ourselves, because that is the step that separates a case study from gossip. This is part 2 of our case study on Kristen and Luke from Bravo's The Valley. Last week, we explored the biology, what postpartum really does to the brain, the body, and the nervous system. If you haven't heard part 1 yet, I gently encourage you to start there, because everything we discuss today rests on that foundation. Today, we turn from what is happening inside Kristen to what is happening between Kristen and Luke. We're going to explore body image and the psychology of desire after childbirth. What happens when 2 dysregulated nervous systems try to love each other? Why a couple is often already practicing parenthood long before the baby arrives, attachment styles, and why control is so often anxiety wearing a different outfit. The goal, as always, is never to decide who was right. It's to understand what each nervous system was trying to accomplish. When the mirror becomes the loudest critic, body image and desire after childbirth. There is a dimension of Kristen's postpartum experience that I found myself thinking about repeatedly, and it has very little to do with numbers on a scale. When most people hear body image, they think about appearance, weight, or clothing size. From a psychological perspective, body image is considerably more complex. It refers to the internal representation we hold of our own body, how we perceive it, how comfortable we feel inhabiting it, and whether it continues to feel like home. Pregnancy fundamentally alters that relationship. The abdomen expands over months. Connective tissue stretches. Breasts enlarge for lactation and, after delivery, may become engorged, tender, and unpredictable. Sleep deprivation becomes visible. Clothing no longer fits in familiar ways. The body that once felt recognizable may suddenly feel unfamiliar, not because it is unhealthy, but because it has undergone one of the most extraordinary biological transformations imaginable. The brain carries an ongoing mental representation of the body, sometimes called the body schema, and when changes occur rapidly, many women describe feeling disconnected from themselves because their bodies no longer feel predictable or familiar. An environment of continuous evaluation. Now place Kristen into the context of the valley. She is not simply taking a family vacation. She is returning to work. Reality television is an unusual occupational environment because one's appearance, emotions, relationships, and vulnerabilities become part of the product. It is an environment characterized by continuous social evaluation, which activates many of the same neural pathways involved in physical threat, because human beings evolved within communities where belonging carried survival value. Add another layer. Kristen is surrounded by women occupying different places along the journey into motherhood. Human beings naturally engage in social comparison, a process through which we evaluate ourselves relative to those around us. Comparison is neither inherently good nor bad, but during periods of identity uncertainty, those comparisons often become magnified. A woman may quietly wonder whether everyone else is coping better, recovered more quickly, or feels more confident. The irony is that many of the women she compares herself to may be asking those very same questions internally. Comparison often creates the illusion that everyone else is managing better because we compare our internal experience with someone else's external presentation. Two different emotional languages. Meanwhile, Luke is moving through a developmental transition of his own, though it is not the same biological transformation Kristen is experiencing. That distinction matters. Kristen's body has gone through pregnancy, childbirth, hormonal withdrawal, physical recovery, body image disruption, and the neurological reorganization of early motherhood. Luke has not gone through that, but he has still entered a new psychological role. His routines have changed, his sleep has changed, his responsibilities have changed, and the relationship that once held much of Kristen's attention, affection, availability, and emotional bandwidth has now been reorganized around the needs of a newborn. Consciously, he may understand that. Of course, the baby needs her. Of course, Kristen is exhausted. Of course, the fourth trimester changes everything. But attachment does not operate only at the level of conscious understanding. Attachment is emotional, bodily, and relational. So while Luke's mind may understand that the baby comes first, his nervous system may still be registering the loss of the couple as they once were. That is why I think it is too simplistic to reduce Luke's comments about their physical relationship to the idea that he only wanted sex. Sexual intimacy, especially in a long-term attachment relationship, is rarely only about sexuality. For many people, physical closeness is the way the nervous system confirms safety, desire, continuity, and repair. A hug after conflict, sitting close on the couch, holding hands, kissing, sleeping beside one another, or being sexually intimate can all function as relational signals that say, we are still okay. If physical touch has historically been Luke's primary language of repair, then the absence of that touch may have felt much larger than the absence of intercourse. It may have felt like the disappearance of the pathway he knew best for finding Kristen again after rupture. That does not make his need immature or selfish. It means his attachment system was reaching for reassurance through the language it already understood. At the same time, Kristen's body may have been telling an entirely different story. Her body had belonged to pregnancy for nearly 10 months. Then it belonged to childbirth. Now, in the postpartum period, it belongs in many ways to infant survival. If she is breastfeeding, the baby needs her body for nourishment. If the baby is crying, her nervous system may mobilize before conscious thought has time to catch up. Her breasts may be engorged, sore, leaking, or unfamiliar. Her abdomen may not look or feel the way it did before. Clothing may fit differently. Medical providers have examined her. Cameras are documenting her. Social media is evaluating her. The mirror may be reflecting a body that she intellectually respects for what it has done, but emotionally does not yet recognize as her own. That is not vanity. That is a disruption in embodied identity, meaning the felt sense of living inside a body that still feels familiar, autonomous, and personally inhabited. This is where the phrase touched out becomes clinically important. Touched out does not mean a woman no longer loves her partner, and it does not mean she is rejecting affection because she is cold or unavailable. It describes sensory saturation, the point at which the nervous system has received so much physical contact, so much bodily demand, and so little uninterrupted ownership of self that additional touch, even loving touch, begins to feel like another requirement rather than a comfort. A partner may reach for closeness and intend tenderness, but the postpartum body may receive it as one more person needing access. That is a profound mismatch because Luke may be reaching for the very thing that helps him feel regulated, while Kristen may be withdrawing from the very thing that makes her feel further depleted. So the deeper question is not, why does Luke want sex? And it is not, why is Kristen pulling away? The deeper question is, what losses are each of them trying to metabolize? Luke may be grieving the relationship as it existed before the baby. The easy affection, the spontaneous intimacy, the reliable physical repair, and the feeling that he knew where he belonged in Kristen's emotional world. Kristen may be grieving the body she had before pregnancy, the autonomy she had before breastfeeding or infant care, the ability to exist without being needed, and the familiar sense of self that has not yet returned. His grief says, I miss us. Her grief says, I miss me. Those statements are not oppositional. They are parallel expressions of loss occurring inside the same family system. Through a Bowen family systems lens, this is where the emotional process becomes visible. Luke's longing for connection may increase his pursuit. Kristen's need for bodily space may increase her withdrawal. His pursuit may feel like pressure to her, while her withdrawal may feel like rejection to him. The more he reaches, the more overwhelmed she may feel. The more she retreats, the more uncertain he may become. Neither nervous system is wrong. Both are attempting to restore safety, but they are using opposite strategies. That is the heartbreak of the postpartum couple system. The behavior that reassures one partner can temporarily overwhelm the other. And unless the couple can name that pattern, they may begin blaming each other for what is actually a collision between attachment needs, sensory thresholds, body image, identity grief, and neurobiological recovery. What we learn by watching others. Here is another psychological layer to this story that I have not heard many people discuss, yet I think it deserves thoughtful consideration. We do not learn about relationships solely through what happens to them personally. We are constantly learning by observing the relationships around us, particularly the relationships of people we love and identify with. Psychologists refer to this as observational learning, sometimes called vicarious learning. It describes the process by which we develop beliefs, expectations, and emotional responses by witnessing another person's experiences rather than living through them ourselves. Kristen entered motherhood after years of watching the relationships unfolding within her own friendship circle and among her fellow cast members. One relationship, in particular, may have been impossible to ignore. Her best friend and fellow cast member, Brittany Cartwright, publicly shared the painful reality of her postpartum experience with then-husband Jax Taylor after the birth of their son, Cruz. Brittany has spoken openly about comments that deeply wounded her during one of the most vulnerable seasons of her life, including Jax telling her that she looked like a tree trunk. Whether spoken in anger, frustration, or thoughtlessness, words like those can become deeply encoded emotional experiences. They communicate far more than dissatisfaction with appearance. To many women, they communicate the terrifying possibility that the body which accomplished the extraordinary task of bringing a child into the world has somehow become less desirable, less lovable, or less worthy of affection. Brittany and Jax have since divorced, but the emotional impact of those experiences became part of the public narrative surrounding their relationship. Now imagine witnessing that, not as a viewer, but as Brittany's best friend. Imagine sitting beside her while she cried, listening to her doubts, watching her confidence erode, seeing the aftermath of criticism directed toward a woman who had just given birth. Whether Kristen consciously connected those experiences to her own future or not, the human brain is constantly gathering information about what is possible in relationships. We build what psychologists call cognitive schemas, internal templates that help us predict what may happen in similar situations. They are the brain's way of preparing us for future experiences based on previous observations. From everything that Luke has shared publicly, there is little evidence to suggest that his attraction to Kristen diminished because of the physical changes associated with pregnancy and childbirth. In fact, his repeated desire for physical closeness suggests quite the opposite. But psychology teaches us something important. Our emotional expectations are not determined only by another person's behavior. They are also shaped by our memories, our observations, our previous relationships, the stories we've heard, and the experiences of people we love. If you have watched your best friend experience rejection after childbirth, your own nervous system may begin asking questions long before anyone has actually rejected you. Will my partner still find me attractive? Will he look at my body differently? Will he compare me to who I was before pregnancy? Will I ever feel beautiful again? Those questions do not require evidence in the present moment. They require only the possibility that history might repeat itself. This is what psychologists sometimes describe as anticipatory anxiety. The nervous system begins preparing for a threat that has not yet occurred because it has learned through direct or indirect experience that the threat is possible. One psychological reality exists inside Luke's mind. Another exists inside Kristen's. Neither one is necessarily aware of the other's internal narrative. Yet both narratives quietly shape the relationship long before either person ever speaks them aloud. That, perhaps, is one of the most important lessons psychology offers us. We do not respond only to what is happening in front of us. We also respond to everything our brain has learned could happen based on the lives of the people we love. Anger as a secondary emotion. Anger is often described as a secondary emotion, one that emerges to protect us from something even more vulnerable underneath. Beneath anger, we frequently discover shame, fear, grief, inadequacy, rejection, or profound sadness. If a woman looks in the mirror and silently thinks, "I feel unattractive, I don't recognize my body, I don't know if I'll ever feel like myself again," those emotions can be extraordinarily difficult to articulate. Shame, in particular, has a way of turning inward until it seeks another outlet. This does not mean postpartum rage is caused by body image. It is multifactorial, influenced by hormonal changes, sleep deprivation, pain, anxiety, and depression. But body dissatisfaction can become one additional source of strain. Sometimes the emotion that cannot be directed toward ourselves becomes expressed in our closest relationships, not because our partner deserves it, but because our partner is where our nervous system feels safest expressing distress. That does not excuse criticism or contempt. It helps explain why they sometimes emerge. Sometimes what looks like criticism is actually fear. Sometimes what looks like withdrawal is actually sensory overload. Sometimes what looks like rejection is actually grief. And sometimes what appears to be a couple arguing about sex is, in reality, two frightened nervous systems asking the same question in different languages. Can you still love me while I am becoming someone neither of us fully recognizes yet? When two dysregulated nervous systems try to love each other. One of the greatest misconceptions about healthy relationships is the belief that successful couples simply communicate better than everyone else. While good and open communication certainly matters, it is rarely the place where relationships either succeed or fail. Communication is the visible expression of something much deeper. Long before words leave our mouths, our nervous systems have already begun speaking through facial expression, muscle tension, vocal tone, eye contact, posture, and breathing. We do not merely exchange information. We exchange nervous system states. This process is known as co-regulation, the remarkable capacity of one regulated nervous system to help another return toward equilibrium. It begins during infancy. A newborn cannot regulate heart rate, body temperature, or emotional distress independently. The infant borrows the caregiver's nervous system. That developmental process never completely disappears. Adults continue borrowing one another's nervous systems throughout life. Think about the last time you walked into a room where someone was visibly angry. Perhaps no one had spoken, yet your shoulders tightened, your breathing changed, and your heart rate increased. Nothing had been explained. Your nervous system had already begun responding. Now imagine two people who both love one another deeply. One nervous system is recovering from pregnancy, childbirth, hormonal withdrawal, sleep fragmentation, identity reconstruction, breastfeeding, and the relentless responsibility of a newborn. The other is adapting to fatherhood, altered routines, financial responsibility, interrupted sleep, uncertainty about his changing role, and repeated experiences of feeling unable to comfort the person he loves most. Neither begins the day fully resourced. This is where viewers sometimes become overly simplistic. We look at one interaction and ask, who started it? Psychology asks a more useful question. Which nervous system became activated first? And how did that activation spread throughout the relationship? Bowen family systems theory has always emphasized that anxiety moves through families much like electricity moves through a circuit. Anxiety is contagious. So is calm. So is irritability. So is compassion. The amygdala hijack. Kristen awakens already physically depleted. The baby cries. Her nervous system mobilizes. Luke notices her distress and his nervous system responds. Perhaps he asks questions or reaches for reassurance. Kristen, who is already overwhelmed by decision fatigue, interprets additional questions as additional demands. Her arousal increases. Luke experiences her irritation and his attachment system activates. Now he begins wondering whether she is angry with him, whether he has done something wrong, whether she still wants him. Neither partner is intentionally escalating. Their nervous systems are. Notice how different that is from saying they just need to communicate better. Communication cannot occur optimally when the brain has shifted into survival physiology. Under chronic stress, the amygdala begins speaking more loudly than the prefrontal cortex, the thoughtful executive capable of evaluating evidence and regulating emotional responses. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as an amygdala hijack, a phrase popularized by Daniel Goleman. During a hijack, emotional reactivity temporarily outpaces thoughtful reasoning. Individuals say things they later regret or interpret neutral events as threatening. This is not evidence of weak character. It is evidence that the nervous system has concluded immediate protection is more important than careful deliberation. Kristen may not have been responding only to Luke's words. She may have been responding to the cumulative physiological burden her nervous system had carried for months. Likewise, Luke may not have been reacting solely to one rejected attempt at intimacy. His attachment system may have been responding to weeks of feeling increasingly disconnected from the person who had once been his primary source of regulation. Protest behavior and repair. This introduces a concept from attachment psychology known as protest behavior, the actions people unconsciously engage in when they fear emotional disconnection. They may pursue reassurance, ask repeatedly whether everything is okay, become more critical, withdraw, or paradoxically push their partner away before they themselves can be rejected. What appears to be anger is sometimes fear wearing armor. What appears to be criticism is sometimes grief searching for language. What appears to be distance is sometimes an exhausted nervous system conserving its remaining energy. From the outside, these behaviors look incompatible. From the inside, they are remarkably similar. Both partners are asking the same question: am I still emotionally safe with you? One of the greatest contributions of interpersonal neurobiology is the recognition that healthy relationships are not built because two perfectly regulated people find one another. They are built because two imperfect nervous systems repeatedly learn how to return one another to safety after life inevitably pulls them apart. That process is called repair. Repair is not the absence of rupture. Repair is the willingness to move back toward one another after rupture has occurred. Unfortunately, during postpartum, the very strategies that once allowed Kristen and Luke to repair may have become temporarily unavailable. Physical affection had historically been one of Luke's primary pathways toward reconnection. Kristen's nervous system, however, may have experienced additional physical contact as one more demand on a body that had not yet fully become her own again. Neither person was intentionally depriving the other. The couple is not simply learning how to raise a baby. They are learning an entirely new language of love. Perhaps love is still present. It is simply searching for a new language through which it can finally be understood. Long before the baby arrived, they were already practicing parenthood. One of the most fascinating aspects of psychology is that human behavior is remarkably consistent across contexts. We often imagine that parenthood suddenly transforms people into entirely different individuals, but more often than not, parenthood amplifies patterns that have been developing for years. The baby is not the origin of those patterns. The baby reveals them. This is one reason I spend so much time in my therapy practice during intake asking questions that, at first glance, seem unrelated to parenting. Who noticed when groceries were running low? Who worried more? Who tolerated uncertainty more comfortably? How were disagreements repaired? Many people wonder why I ask about pets. Long before a couple becomes responsible for a child, they often rehearse aspects of caregiving through the animals they love. If you want to know how someone is likely to parent, don't just ask how they were parented. Watch how they care for the things they already love, such as their furry little creatures in their lives, their dogs. If we had carefully observed Kristen and Luke's relationship with their dogs over the years, we might have learned far more about their future parenting than either of them realized. Kristen has consistently demonstrated a remarkable capacity for nurturance. Her dogs were never simply animals living in her home. They occupied an emotionally central place within her family system. That tells us something. Caregiving is not merely a behavior for Kristen. It is part of her identity, and identity-based behaviors tend to become even more pronounced under stress. When her daughter was born, that caregiving system did not suddenly emerge. It expanded. The recipient changed. The underlying psychological organization remained remarkably consistent. Why a cry can feel like an emergency. When I say that some mothers experience their baby's cry as almost physically painful, I mean that quite literally. For many women, the sound does not simply register as a noise entering the ears. It becomes a full-body physiological experience. A newborn enters the world completely dependent. Unlike many mammals, human infants cannot walk, regulate temperature, feed themselves, or escape danger. Their primary survival strategy is remarkably simple. They cry. That cry is not merely a sound to a mother, it is an alarm system that evolution has been refining over hundreds of thousands of years. Researchers using functional brain imaging have demonstrated that when mothers hear their own infant cry, multiple regions of the brain become active almost simultaneously. Areas involved in attention, threat detection, empathy, and caregiving, all communicating within fractions of a second. When Luke hears the baby cry, he hears a baby crying. When Kristen hears the baby cry, her nervous system may experience something much closer to a physiological emergency. Those are not the same experience. Hormones are extraordinarily important here. During pregnancy and after childbirth, oxytocin, prolactin, estrogen, and progesterone do far more than prepare the body for labor and breastfeeding. They alter the sensitivity of the maternal brain. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, strengthens attachment while increasing attention to infant cues. Imagine turning the volume knob on a stereo from level 3 to level 10. The music has not changed. Your sensitivity to it has. Breastfeeding mothers may even experience the letdown reflex, where hearing their infant cry triggers oxytocin release, and milk begins flowing before the baby has reached the breast. The body is preparing to feed the baby before the mother has consciously decided to. It is biology, anticipating need before conscious thought catches up. Interoception, feeling the cry in the body. The father may hear the baby cry and process it as an external sound. The mother may hear the same cry and experience it as an internal physiological signal. Her chest tightens, her attention narrows, her heart rate increases. The psychological term that helps explain this is interoception, the brain's ability to detect and interpret signals from inside the body, such as hunger, heart rate, breath, muscle tension, and emotional arousal. During pregnancy and postpartum, many women become exquisitely attuned not only to their own internal states, but also to the infant's cues, almost as if the baby's distress becomes registered inside the mother's body. When a mother says, "I can feel the cry in my body," she is not being poetic. She may be describing a very real neurobiological experience. This is one place where many partners misunderstand what is happening. A father may interpret the mother's urgency as anxiety or overprotectiveness, but for many mothers, waiting even 60 seconds can feel physiologically intolerable because her body is already mobilizing. Luke may be thinking, "Let's give her a minute." Kristen's body may be saying, "Move now." Neither response automatically means one parent loves more. It means their nervous systems may be receiving very different levels of biological urgency. The clinical question is not who is right. The better question is, what is each parent's body experiencing that the other cannot see? The father as protector of the environment. Before the baby, Kristen's emotional, cognitive, and relational bandwidth was largely available to Luke. Then their daughter arrived, and the allocation of attention changed overnight, because a newborn cannot postpone hunger or remain alive without consistent caregiving. From an evolutionary perspective, that redistribution is adaptive. From an attachment perspective, it can feel profoundly disorienting for the partner. Luke may consciously understand exactly why Kristen's attention has shifted. Conscious understanding, however, does not always quiet the attachment system, which operates largely outside conscious awareness. His mind may say, "Of course the baby comes first." His attachment system may quietly whisper, "But where do I fit now?" Perhaps one of the father's most important developmental tasks during the earliest postpartum months is recognizing that his role has changed, not diminished, but transformed. His primary responsibility is no longer simply to love his partner. It is to protect the conditions under which she and the baby can thrive. Sometimes that means changing diapers, preparing meals, managing visitors, holding the baby between feedings, watching for signs of postpartum depression or anxiety, creating opportunities for the mother to sleep, and reducing decision fatigue rather than adding to it. He becomes the protector of the caregiving environment itself. That role is no less significant than breastfeeding. It is simply different. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of Bowen family systems. The goal is never to determine whose needs matter more. The goal is to create a family in which each person's needs can be recognized, understood, and addressed without requiring another person's needs to disappear. That is the foundation of a resilient family system. Attachment styles. Why the same relationship can feel completely different to two people. One of the most influential theories in modern psychology is attachment theory, originally developed by psychiatrist John Bowlby and later expanded by developmental psychologist Mary Ainsworth. Although often discussed in relation to infants, its principles continue influencing romantic relationships throughout adulthood. Attachment theory begins with a beautifully simple observation. Human beings are born completely dependent upon other people. Evolution, therefore, designed the developing brain to prioritize one task above almost everything else. Stay close to the people who keep you alive. Over thousands of interactions with caregivers, the brain gradually develops expectations. When I need someone, do they come? Am I safe? Those repeated experiences become what psychologists call an internal working model, a largely unconscious blueprint for how relationships function. Importantly, attachment styles are not fixed diagnoses. They are adaptive nervous system strategies, the brain's best attempt to maintain connection under the circumstances in which a person developed. Individuals with secure attachment generally expect that relationships can tolerate stress, disagreement, distance, and repair. Secure attachment does not mean someone never becomes anxious. It means anxiety does not immediately convince them the relationship is ending. They can think, we're having a difficult season, rather than our relationship is falling apart. Individuals with anxious attachment often experience emotional distance as psychologically threatening. Their nervous system becomes highly attuned to signs of separation. This is not attention seeking. It is attachment seeking. Now think about Luke. Throughout the season, he repeatedly talked about missing physical closeness, and many viewers interpreted that as simply wanting sex. Psychologically, that interpretation is incomplete. If physical affection has historically functioned as one of his primary attachment signals, then the sudden absence of that familiar connection may have activated something much deeper than sexual frustration. His nervous system may have been asking, are we still emotionally connected? Individuals with avoidant attachment generally learned early that depending on others did not reliably produce comfort. As adults, they often become highly self-reliant, and when relationships become emotionally intense, their nervous systems may reduce closeness rather than increase it. This is not because they lack love. It is because their nervous system learned a different survival strategy. The fourth pattern, sometimes called disorganized or fearful avoidant, involves an internal conflict. A person deeply desires closeness and also fears it. One of the biggest misconceptions is that people permanently are one attachment style. Real life is more nuanced. Attachment exists on a continuum. Different relationships activate different parts of us. Even securely attached couples can temporarily experience anxious behaviors when enormous stress enters the family system. That is one reason I hesitate to label either Kristen or Luke. What interests me far more is what their nervous systems are doing in this particular developmental season. The attachment dance. Imagine Luke's attachment system quietly asking, are we still us? Do you still need me? Will we ever feel close again? Now imagine Kristen's nervous system asking an entirely different set of questions. Can I keep this baby alive? Am I doing enough? Why don't I recognize my own body? Will I ever sleep again? Neither partner is asking unreasonable questions. They are asking different questions. Luke's attachment system is trying to preserve the couple. Kristen's nervous system is trying to preserve the baby while simultaneously rebuilding itself. Neither task is more important. Both are essential. The tragedy is that those tasks can temporarily compete for limited emotional resources. Luke reaches for connection. Kristen reaches for recovery. The more he reaches, the more pressure she may feel. The more she withdraws, the more uncertainty he experiences. Bowen would describe this as an emotional process rather than a character flaw. Attachment theory would describe it as two nervous systems attempting to restore safety using different strategies. Neither theory asks, who is the problem? Both ask, what is each nervous system trying to protect? Perhaps that is the most compassionate way to understand Kristen and Luke. Not as two people failing each other, but as two human beings whose brains, bodies, hormones, attachment systems, identities, and family roles are all being reorganized at the very same time. And perhaps the most hopeful finding from decades of attachment research is this: attachment is not determined by perfection, it is determined by repair. Control is often anxiety wearing a different outfit. One of the most misunderstood behaviors in psychology is the need for control. We often use the word controlling as though it describes a personality flaw in a person. Someone is described as controlling, and the conversation usually stops there. Rarely do we pause to ask a far more meaningful question. What function is control serving for this person's nervous system? Almost every behavior serves a purpose. We just need to look at what purpose it actually serves. Some behaviors protect us or reduce uncertainty. Others help us regulate when we are experiencing overwhelming emotions. Control often belongs in that last category. The brain is fundamentally a prediction machine. One of its primary responsibilities is anticipating what comes next, because prediction conserves energy and enhances survival. When life becomes unpredictable, the nervous system works harder. It scans more. It worries more. Few experiences introduce more unpredictability than the arrival of a newborn. A baby who slept 3 hours yesterday may sleep 45 minutes today. The nervous system quickly learns that certainty has become remarkably scarce. Imagine standing in the middle of an earthquake. The ground is moving. You cannot stop the earthquake. What do most people instinctively do? They grab onto something stable because the act of holding on reduces the terrifying experience of complete unpredictability. Control often functions in exactly the same way. It does not eliminate uncertainty. It simply gives the nervous system something solid to hold on to. Now return to Kristen. Her hormones are fluctuating. Her sleep is fragmented. Her body no longer feels predictable. Her emotions surprise even her. What can she control? The brain often begins to organize the external world. The diaper bag must be packed a certain way. The bottles must be washed in this order. From the outside, those rules may appear rigid. From the inside, they may feel profoundly calming because predictability becomes medicine for an overwhelmed nervous system. This is why I am careful when I hear a partner describe a new mother as controlling. Perhaps she is. That is possible. But I immediately become curious. What is her nervous system trying to accomplish? Because underneath many controlling behaviors lies anxiety. Underneath anxiety often lies fear. Underneath fear often lies love. Why relief teaches the brain to repeat. There is a neurobiological reason these patterns become entrenched. When Kristen takes over and her anxiety temporarily decreases, her brain is not releasing a single control chemical. Several systems are interacting. One is dopamine. Most people think of dopamine as the pleasure chemical, but that is an oversimplification. Dopamine is better understood as the brain's prediction and learning neurotransmitter. Every time the brain performs a behavior that successfully reduces uncertainty or increases the likelihood of safety, Dopamine helps strengthen that neural pathway. Imagine Kristen's anxiety rising because the baby is crying. Luke begins changing the diaper. She notices he is fastening it differently. Her anxiety increases. She steps in and takes over. The baby settles. Immediately, her nervous system experiences relief, and her brain makes an association. When I take control, the anxiety decreases. At the same time, the body's primary stress response system, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, begins quieting. Cortisol and adrenaline gradually decline. That reduction in arousal feels like relief. This is one of the fundamental principles of operant conditioning, first described by psychologist B.F. Skinner. Specifically, this is negative reinforcement. The word negative confuses people because it does not mean something bad happened. In psychology, negative reinforcement means a behavior becomes more likely because it successfully removed something unpleasant. The unpleasant experience is overwhelming anxiety. The behavior is taking control. The reward is the reduction of anxiety. The brain concludes, do that again. Notice something important. The brain does not ask whether the behavior improved the relationship. It asks whether the behavior improved survival. Those are two very different goals. What regulates one system can dysregulate another. While Kristen's anxiety decreases, Luke's confidence may decrease. His nervous system begins learning something entirely different. Every time I try, I'm corrected. Maybe I'm not good at this. Maybe I should let her do it. Over time, his brain may stop initiating because initiating has become emotionally costly. Psychologists refer to this as learned helplessness, a concept introduced by psychologist Martin Seligman, which occurs when repeated experiences of perceived failure or lack of control lead individuals to stop trying even when they are capable of succeeding. It does not mean a person has become helpless. It means the brain begins expecting that its efforts will not make a meaningful difference, so it conserves energy by withdrawing. Notice the heartbreaking irony. Kristen becomes more involved because her anxiety temporarily improves when she takes over. Luke may become less involved because his discomfort temporarily improves when he steps back. Neither person consciously chooses this pattern. Both brains are adapting, and because these adaptations reduce immediate discomfort, they become neurologically efficient. This is one of the greatest paradoxes in relationships. The behaviors that reduce anxiety today can quietly create distance tomorrow. That is why, in therapy, we rarely ask only, did this make you feel better? We also ask, what did this teach your brain? Because the brain is always learning. This is where Bowen family systems theory becomes so helpful. These reciprocal patterns are not created by one individual. They emerge within relationships. The more anxious one partner becomes, the more the other adapts, and those adaptations feed back into the original anxiety, creating a cycle neither person intentionally designed. If the couple only argues about diapers, bottles, or bedtime routines, they miss the deeper conversation. The real conversation is not about diapers. It is about fear, trust, competence, and identity. It is about two loving people trying to regain their footing while the emotional architecture of their family is being rebuilt. Once we understand that control is often the nervous system's attempt to manufacture safety and not evidence of a lack of love, we stop asking, why is she so controlling? We begin asking what uncertainty feels so overwhelming that her brain believes control is the only path back to safety. That question doesn't excuse hurtful behavior, but it does replace judgment with curiosity. And in my experience as a therapist, curiosity is almost always where healing begins. Turning the case study toward yourself. Now we've arrived at one of my favorite parts of every episode, what I call the path to peace pause. This is the moment where we stop studying the people on the screen and turn the lens back toward ourselves. Because insight about someone else changes very little. Insight about our own patterns is what changes families. So the pause is simply this: a handful of quiet questions meant not to be answered quickly, but to be carried with you. Before we begin, I want you to resist the temptation that reality television quietly encourages in all of us, the temptation to choose a side. Because the goal was never to decide who was right. The goal was to understand what each nervous system was trying to accomplish. When we understand the science, we stop asking what is wrong with someone, and we begin asking what happened to them, and then, how do we heal together? This week's 2 questions. Path to peace. Pause. Question 1. When you find yourself emotionally dysregulated, what does your nervous system do to try to create safety? And what problem is it actually trying to solve? Do you become more controlling, withdraw, become critical, go quiet, seek reassurance, or overfunction for everyone else? Path to peace. Pause. Question 2. If the people who know you best described what happens to you under stress, would their description match your own? And what would that gap tell you about your intention versus your impact? One's behavior tells a deeper, complex story. Even when it looks irrational from the outside, it is often the nervous system's attempt to solve an internal problem, to lower distress, regain predictability, create safety, restore connection, protect us against shame, or prevent emotional collapse. That does not mean every behavior is healthy, fair, or effective. It means the behavior is doing a job. So the more sophisticated clinical question is not simply, what did this person do? That question only describes the surface. The deeper question is, what was this behavior attempting to regulate, protect, or restore? Because once we understand the function of the behavior, we are no longer merely reacting to the symptom. We are finally beginning to understand the system that produced it. Go deeper over on Patreon and Substack. If today's episode resonated with you, I have 8 more reflection questions waiting for you inside the companion journal over on Substack. That's where we go even deeper, because insight grows exponentially when you take the time to reflect rather than simply listen. Inside the journal, we'll explore 8 more questions. We unpack each of those together with room to write inside this week's companion journal. You'll find it on my Substack, linked in the show notes. This episode is for educational purposes and support. It is not a psychological evaluation, diagnosis, or treatment recommendation for anyone featured, and it is not a substitute for professional mental health care. If you are struggling, please reach out to a licensed professional in your area. If you are a new or expecting parent and the themes of postpartum anxiety, depression, or overwhelm feel close to home, you are not alone and support is available. In the United States, you can call or text the National Maternal Mental Health Hotline at 1-833-TLC-MAMA, 1-833-8526262, free and confidential, available every day in English and Spanish. If you are ever in crisis, call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You can reach me and my practice at thepathtopeacetherapy.com. Across these 2 episodes, we've explored what postpartum does to the brain and what happens between 2 people who love each other. Next, we move from understanding to recovery. In How the Postpartum Brain Heals, we'll explore nutrition, not as a way to bounce back, but as the raw material the brain requires to rebuild neurotransmitters. We'll talk about protein, omega-3 fatty acids, hydration, magnesium, vitamin D, and stable blood sugar. We'll discuss movement and BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is one of the most important concepts to understand when we talk about healing the postpartum brain. I often explain to my clients that BDNF as a kind of biological growth factor for the nervous system. It helps neurons survive, strengthens communication between brain cells, supports learning and memory, and allows the brain to adapt after stress, change, and major life transitions. In simpler language, BDNF helps the brain rebuild. That matters tremendously during the postpartum period because the mother's brain is not simply waiting to go back to normal. It is actively reorganizing itself around a new identity, a new attachment relationship, new responsibilities, new sleep patterns, and a completely different hormonal environment. This is one of the reasons movement is so powerful. Exercise should not be framed only as a way to lose baby weight or get your body back. That language is psychologically damaging and biologically incomplete. Movement is one of the most effective ways to support brain recovery because aerobic activity can increase BDNF, improve blood flow to the brain, support dopamine regulation, reduce inflammation, improve insulin sensitivity, help regulate cortisol, and support better sleep over time. A 20-minute walk is not merely a walk. For a postpartum mother, it can be a neurobiological intervention. It is helping create the internal conditions her brain needs to heal, adapt, and regain flexibility. This is especially important for women experiencing anxiety, depression, ADHD symptoms, intrusive thoughts, or emotional dysregulation after childbirth. The postpartum brain is carrying enormous cognitive and emotional load while often functioning on fragmented sleep, inconsistent nutrition, and reduced recovery time. Movement gives the brain a signal of safety and repair. It helps the nervous system discharge stress physiology rather than remaining trapped in constant activation. It also gives the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, emotional regulation, attention, and perspective taking, more support to come back online. This is where fathers, partners, and spouses can become an essential part of the recovery system. The invitation should not sound like, you should go exercise, because to a postpartum mother who may already feel unfamiliar in her body, that can land as criticism, even if it was not intended that way. The message needs to be reframed entirely. It sounds more like, I have the baby, go get some fresh air, walk slowly, look at the sky, let your body remember there is a world beyond feeding schedules, diapers, and being needed every second. This is not about changing your body. This is about helping your brain recover. That distinction matters because movement is not only physical, it is neurochemical. A walk outside can increase dopamine, which supports motivation, focus, and a sense of reward. It can increase endorphins, the body's natural pain-relieving and mood-supporting chemicals. It can help regulate cortisol, the stress response hormone. It can support BDNF, which helps the brain adapt, repair, and build healthier neural connections. It can also create psychological distance from the intensity of the newborn environment. Sometimes stepping outside for 20 minutes gives the brain enough space to remember, I am still a person. I am still here. The world is bigger than this room, so the father's role is not to pressure her into productivity. It is to protect access to restoration, one walk at a time, 1 hour of uninterrupted sleep at a time, one full glass of water, one warm meal, one moment where her nervous system can exhale. That is not minor support. That is mental health care inside the family system. She needs support for the brain and body that have already carried an extraordinary load. Sleep architecture, journaling, sunlight, community, and co-regulation. We'll have an evidence-based conversation about cannabis and anxiety. And I'll speak directly to the fathers about their role in the 4th trimester. Because once we understand how the brain heals, the next question naturally becomes, how do we help that brain recover? Take a deep breath, give yourself some grace, and remember, understanding the patterns is the first step. Practicing something healthier is what changes the story. You got this, and I've got you.